I built this program beginning right after the massacre as a way of dealing with my own grief. And it's very important to me to offer it every year. And to be able to do it at Or Hadash is especially sweet because this feels like a new home. And in fact, Or Hadash is the place that the congregation I've been to, which feels the most like Dor Hadash in Pittsburgh, which is what I'm going to be talking about. And that is part of why I'm so happy here, because it feels good for my soul. It feels like this connection is really important. So, I grew up in Pittsburgh in Squirrel Hill, and it was magical. And I had, it was the most intact Jewish community in the country outside of New York City. And I think that's actually still true. In most cities, the Jewish community moved to the suburbs and separated out. And Squirrel Hill is not like that. The majority of Jews in the whole city of Pittsburgh live in Squirrel Hill. There are like 25 to 30 synagogues within 2 miles. I grew up with stores that were closed on Shabbat and open on Sundays. Everything shut down for the Israeli Day Parade. The JCC is in the center of Squirrel Hill, and it has the Hebrew letters on the clock tower. And it, I would walk down the street and hear Hebrew and Yiddish and Russian as often as English. And yet, until I got to college, I just had no idea how special it was, how unusual a place it was. When I got to college, I went to Vassar, and I chose it over Oberlin because I thought, it's in New York, there'll be a more richer Jewish community. And that is not true. And actually at Vassar, there were plenty of Jewish people, but most of them were really ashamed of being Jewish. They were uncomfortable in their own skin. Someone said to me, well, I realized that I'm gay, so I obviously am not really going to be Jewish anymore, or I'm liberal, or I don't believe in God. And I just was stunned. I just never met any people who didn't just take for granted that being Jewish was a wonderful part of life. I grew up, my family's very secular and very, very involved in Jewish education. And that's what we do, and we teach. I had a bat mitzvah, but I never went back to synagogue from that day on. But when I was in high school, I met a group of kids who, in Young Judea, who all had really wonderful associations with synagogue. And I was shocked. What could that be about? So I started going to their synagogue, and it turns out it was Dor Hadash, a Reconstructionist congregation that didn't have a rabbi, that was all led by really deeply invested members with lots of social action and Jewish learning and just deep relationships. And I loved it. The teens would go to services, and the services were often led by Pitt professors, and the teenagers were fully participating in these discussions. And I jumped right in, and I loved it. And my secular parents said, I guess we got to find out what this is about. And so they started going. And over the 4 years that I was at Vassar, my dad became vice president of social action and then vice president of ritual. My aunt was social events. My uncle was treasurer, and then my mother was president. So they kind of went down the rabbit hole with me. Yeah. So when I was at Vassar realizing this was all pretty special, what it led me to do was write my college thesis about the Jewish community of Squirrel Hill. So I used a lot of, I worked in the JCC. I taught English as a second language. I worked with Soviet Jews, and I wrote my thesis about how the American Jews in the neighborhood reacted to the Soviet Jews and what that relationship was like. So it's also, you know, it's everything. It's my home. It's my academic work. So the first slide. This is the day, so Dor Hadash doesn't own a building, and so it has rented different spaces over time. So this is a picture of the day that the congregation carried the Torahs from a prior location to the Tree of Life building. To understand what Tree of Life is like, the best thing I can say is if you've been to Germantown Jewish Center, it is a large conservative old building that doesn't have a population to fill it anymore. And so the Reconstructionist congregation rented space, and a different sort of conservadox congregation, New Light Rep, has space, and Tree of Life does have its own minyan. So it's one big building with 3 very small congregations. And this is the day that I wasn't there. This is the day that they marched the Torahs to move into Tree of Life, and it was a joyous day. You know, they closed the streets, lots of singing and music. So the person who the arrow is pointing to is Dan Lager. Dan is a close family friend, and I'll tell you more about him, and he's a survivor. And the other person holding a Torah to the right, the blue Torah, that is Dr. Jerry Benowitz, who was killed. And in pink, oh, sorry. Alana, I don't know, yeah, thanks. In pink, making a really goofy face, that's my dad. The year before the shooting, my dad became ill with cancer and eventually died. And it created the opportunity for me to reconnect with a lot of people in Pittsburgh, because I was there a lot. And Dor Hadash was the place. It was my parents' community, and it held us all together. And Dan, in particular, Dan is by profession, he is a nurse, and he was working as a hospice chaplain. So he's the person my mother called to explain to my dad that the treatments weren't working and it was time to stop, and it was time to move into a hospice. And then when my dad did die, it was Dan who did the funeral. It is not easy to do the funeral for the parent of a rabbi. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And he was remarkable. It was this wonderful grace that he gave me, and he's like, "You're the daughter, you're the daughter. I'm the rabbi, you're the daughter." The first person I want to talk about is Jerry Benowitz. Someone has a slide for Jerry. It will say Jerry Benowitz at the top, and I will tell you in a second what you have it? Okay, there's 2. So the first one is the voice of Michael Kerr. Howie, why don't you come up and read that one? His life of people online.
My Dr. Jerry Benowitz was among those killed in the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. He took care of me up until I left Pittsburgh for New York City in 2004. In the old days for HIV patients, in Pittsburgh, he was the one to go to. Basically, before there was effective treatment for fighting HIV itself, he was known in the community for keeping us alive the longest. He often held our hands without rubber gloves and always hugged us as we left his office. We made a deal about my T cells, and in that I didn't want to know the numbers visit to visit because I knew I would fret with every little fluctuation. And also I knew that AZT was not working for my friends. The deal was that he would just let me know at some point when the T cell numbers meant I needed to start on medications. The numbers were his job, and my job was to finish with my master's thesis and get a job with insurance and try not to go crazy. I got lucky beyond words because when he gently told me around November 1995 that it was time to begin taking medications, there was an ACTG trial for 2 HIV medications that saved my life, one of which I still take today. Thank you, ACTUP, for getting ACT UP for getting these drugs into safe but effective expedited research protocol. You saved my life. And thank you, Dr. Rabinowitz, for having always been there during the most terrifying and threatening time of my life. You will be remembered by me always. You are one of my heroes, just like the early ACT UP warriors, some of which I now call friend.
And Ruby was reading into the microphone. If you could read nice and slowly and right into the microphone, there's been a request from online.
This is written, can you hear me?
Right into the microphone.
Okay, this is written by Rabbi Anna Boswell Levy.
She's the rabbi of Cohen in Harp.
Okay. My dear friend Jerry Rabinowitz was killed in the shooting. He was a doctor, a cat lover, and the kindest person you could dream of meeting. He and his wife Miri signed our Tanaim, conditions of engagement, and they coordinated all the silliness and shtick at our wedding. They took in my cat Pele when Josh's allergies couldn't tolerate him anymore, and we cried together on the phone just last month when Pele passed away. Jerry and Miri's home was an oasis of welcome, relaxation, good food and drink, and kitties everywhere. Yehi Zichro Baruch.
Does somebody have the words for Ellen Liger? Come on up, Thea. Ellen is the wife of Dan Liger.
Last week, my Dan and I had to dash out the door after a quick Shabbat dinner. Just the two of us to get to Dor Hadash for the beautiful Friday night service our dear friend Rabbi Yitz's husband's Hankin was leading. So I blew out the candles before leaving, something we rarely do. But I cannot relax and enjoy Shabbos if I leave candles burning. The service was warm and beautiful with so much singing and talk about caring for each other and our world. The next morning, Dan went off to shul and I decided to take a lovely walk in the park with our dogs. When I got home around 10, there was a knock on the door. Friends had come over to see if I knew what was going on. They had heard that there was a shooting at the Tree of Life. I knew my guy was there, and I called my friend Miri to see if Jerry was there also. She said yes. We got in the car and headed over to the street 2 blocks away from the Tree of Life synagogue, where we stood waiting to find out what was happening. Our greatest fears were realized. I won't be lighting my Shabbos candles this week, or next, or perhaps longer. I will wait until my dearest loved Dan is home again. I thank God that I know he will eventually come home. My heart breaks for my friend Miri and her family and all the other family whose dear ones were murdered last week. May I ask my friends and even friends I haven't met yet to consider adding 1 candle for my family this Shabbat, to include in your prayers Daniel and Ellen, Noah, and Jacob, our sons. To all of you who have asked what you can do to help me get through this nightmare, this is what I ask of you. When Dan is home and safe, the first Shabbat, I will relight these candles and feel that moment of sweet tranquility, but for now, it will remain my Shabbat interrupted.
So it was a Saturday morning. It was about 9:45, and Dan and Jerry were leaders of Dor Hadash. Jerry was a past president, and they got there early to set up, which I'm sure lots of you have done here. So they were in the rabbi's study setting up. And in the main sanctuary, there were a group, mostly very elderly people, in the very back row. And downstairs in a different social hall, the rabbi and a few congregants were beginning a service for the New Light congregation. Dan and Jerry and another friend who was with them setting up heard the gunshots. They knew what it was. Dan had the presence of mind to call his friend, Rabbi Yitzhak Hankin, who is a Reconstructionist rabbi visiting from Oregon, because he knew that he wouldn't be hooked into any kind of emergency alerts on his phone that were in Pittsburgh. And he knew his friend would be walking to shul, so he was afraid he'll walk right in. So he calls his friend and says, "Don't come, there's an active shooter." And then he and Jerry ran towards the gunfire to see if they could help anyone. Jerry was a doctor and Dan a nurse, and their instinct was to help. And they ran right in, and Jerry happened to be right in front of Dan. So Jerry died, and Dan laid on the floor for a very long time till he could be rescued. So in the main sanctuary, the rabbi was Rabbi Jeffrey Myers. Does someone have a slide for Rabbi Myers? Would you come read it up here?
Rabbi Jeffrey Myers, who was presiding over the service at the Pittsburgh Synagogue Tree of Life on Saturday morning when the government murdered 11 praying congregants, told the Today Show the story of the tragedy. "I heard him execute my congregants," he said. This is my home and it's been desecrated," Myers said. "We will rebuild because we are the Tree of Life. We've been here 154 years. You can cut off some branches, but the tree will continue to grow and we will be back." Myers recounted the tragic events of what began like a normal Shabbat service. "Within a few minutes, I heard what I thought was crashing metal. He reportedly assumed one of the senior citizen congregants had lost their balance and fell into a coat rack. The next set of bullets rang out within the next 10 to 15 seconds, Myers reported. Something inside told me this is gunfire. He quickly took action, telling his congregants to drop to the floor. After helping congregants escape the building, Myers said he went back in. I tried to see if I could go back to get the 8 remaining people in the back of the congregation. He did not make it in time. Myers was reportedly the first to call 911. There is hate and it isn't going away. It just seems to be getting worse, he said. Myers added that these were good, decent people. They didn't have an ounce of hate in any of them. We turn to the leaders of our country. We can't just say we need to stop hate. We need to act. Hate is not welcome here in Pittsburgh.
So Rabbi Myers is a conservative rabbi, and it had been his custom not to carry a cell phone or use electricity on Shabbat, but they had just had a security training at Tree of Life within the month prior to this happening, and the security people insisted that he had to have a cell phone in his pocket at all times for an emergency. The security preparations also included going through this building, which is an old convoluted building with lots of years of different renovations and different usages, and determining where there were places to hide and where there were ways to escape. So Myers got out very quickly and was able to get out some of his congregants. So does someone have Barry Werber? In the basement, 4 members of New Light congregation were just starting to pray, with 2 others in the kitchen, when they heard crashing sounds coming from upstairs. Barry Werber and others from his congregation looked over to the stairwell, and their worst fears were realized when they saw a victim's bullet-riddled body slumped over. Let me be very honest. I was frightened. I was scared. I have a wife at home, ill, and I have a son living in Squirrel Hill, and I didn't want to leave them, said Werber. He said Rabbi Jonathan Perlman closed the door and pushed them into a large supply closet. As gunshots echoed upstairs, Werber called 911, but was afraid to say anything for fear of making any noise. When the shots subsided, he said, Melvin Wax opened the door only to be shot and fall back inside. There were 3 shots, and he falls back into the room where we were, he said. The gunman walks in. The gunmen entered their hiding spot and looked around. He looked around only because there was a shaft of light as he opened the door. He stepped over Mel's body, didn't pay any attention, stepped back. He didn't see us, thank God, said Mr. Werber. So, what they're describing, so Barry called 911, but he was afraid to speak. And he happened to have a stupid phone, so it didn't have a light when it was open. So when the shooter looked into the closet, he didn't see anyone because the phone didn't light up, just luck. And Mel Wax, who he describes him being killed, he was hard of hearing. And so he was hiding in the closet with all of them, and anxiety that I cannot imagine. And he wanted to know what was going on, and it had been quiet for a while. So he just opened the door and peeked out, and he was killed. And the people who were hiding in the closet had to not move or respond or gasp or anything, because they too would have been killed. Does someone have Audrey Glickman?
Audrey Glickman was leading an early morning service inside Pittsburgh's Tree of Life synagogue when gunfire broke out Saturday. Glickman and the others with her ran and hid. Still holding their prayer books and wearing their prayer shawls, they ensconced themselves in a room with a window in the door. Glickman said, "We were trying to disguise ourselves as bags of clothing in a room of bags of clothing," she told WTAE. "We wanted him not to have a reason to come in. We heard the gunfire and we heard the sirens and we didn't come out until both seemed to have stopped," Glickman told WTAE. "We ran and we hid and then we escaped with our lives," Glickman said. But we lost people who were part of the fabric of not only our congregation, but our community. These are people who would do anything for anybody. People who come early to a service are the kind of people who are the kindest, most generous. She stressed, "You're taught to hate. I don't know why we do this. In fact, we Jews teach our children that they're going to be hated. In every generation, there's somebody who will hate. You have to deal with it, and you have to move on."
Does someone have Judas Sammet?
Twice now, Judah Sammet has almost paid for his life with his life for being Jewish. More than 70 years ago, he narrowly escaped death in Germany's Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Again Saturday, he looked death in the face, not in his native Hungary, but in the country where he found sanctuary after the Second World War. Sammet has been a member of the Tree of Life congregation for 54 years, he said. For 4 decades, he was a part-time cantor, chanting prayers and helping to lead worship. On Saturday morning, he did what he always does on the Sabbath. He went to the synagogue. Services start at 9:45 a.m., yet that morning Samet was delayed. I was talking to my housekeeper here. She comes once a week, he said in a phone conversation from his condominium, where he lives alone. He needs only a few minutes to drive the leafy streets to his synagogue in Squirrel Hill, the nucleus of Jewish Pittsburgh. I was 4 minutes late. Instead of 9:45, I got there about 9:49, maybe 9:50. Those 4 minutes may have saved his life. He entered the parking lot and was pulling into a handicapped spot when someone knocked on his window. A man dressed in black advised him to back out carefully. He said there was an active shooting going on inside the synagogue, Samet recalled. That's when he saw an officer crouched on his passenger side, several feet ahead of his car, popping his head out from behind a barrier to fire in the opposite direction. He was close enough to see smoke rising from the muzzle of his gun. I wanted to see who he was shooting, Samet said. The gunman had emerged from inside the building, he said, and had a shootout with police. Then he went back and finished the job at my synagogue. He heard 3 or 4 salvos before he pulled out of the parking lot unharmed. I was in the line of fire, he said. Luckily, I wasn't hit. For Samet, Judaism is essential, second only to his family in importance, and he sees violence as anathema. Hatred is not in the Jewish DNA, he said. I mean, everybody tried to kill us, destroy us. Can we hate everybody in the whole world? No, we don't hate.
Does someone have Carol Black?
Soon after arriving at the synagogue for services that morning, Carol Black said she heard what sounded like a metal table falling against a tile floor. Initially, she assumed someone had just dropped something. But when the sound happened again, and this time closer, Rabbi Jeffrey Myers ushered her and 2 others to a back hallway and into a dark storage closet. I don't know how long we were in there, she said. It felt like a year, but it was probably closer to 20 minutes. Her brother, Richard Gottfried, was among the victims in the deadliest attack on the Jewish community in American history. The intellectual part of me knew that my brother probably didn't make it, because as they were taking me out of the building, I kept saying, "My brother's in there. You've got to go get my brother," Black said. But my heart kept saying that maybe he managed to escape. In reality, there was no place for them to go. He was trapped. They were sitting ducks, and there was no way they were going to survive. Black's brother, Richard Gottfried, was the heartbeat of the congregation, she said, and his death has been a crushing blow to the community. Her brother is survived by his wife, Louise. The couple had just celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary the prior weekend. The Gottfrieds were both dentists in the area and owned their own practice together. They had planned to retire in March, Black said. Talking about this, in a sense, is cathartic for me. It makes me feel more human and alive, she said. I'm glad to be alive.
Does someone have the slide for Justin Sipholt? It says Pittsburgh paramedic at the top.
Justin Sipholt is a paramedic trained as part of Pittsburgh's tactical EMS team. a team of armed paramedics who follow SWAT and police officers into active scenes to get injured victims faster. He got up early Saturday morning to get ready to host a Halloween party at his Westwood home. I had actually just started brewing a cup of coffee when I got a text message from a friend of mine that there's an active shooter, he said. He went for his radio, and soon the coffee was forgotten. Within seconds of listening to what was happening on the radio, I knew this was it, he said. I took my clothes off like I was on fire and jumped into my SWAT gear. He turned to his wife and told her he was sorry. She told him to do what he had to do. Sippold is part of On Saturday. He drove straight to the Tree of Life congregation in Squirrel Hill, where a gunman was firing on officers from the front door of the synagogue. 11 people already lay dead inside, and 2 more were injured, saved most likely by the speed and efficiency of paramedics like Sippold. On Murray Avenue, he linked up with fellow tactical EMS member Jonathan Atkinson, who brought the team's dedicated ambulance to the scene. With the scene unsecure and still very active, Sippold and 4 others went in. He said SWAT operators were just a few steps into the building before they started screaming for paramedics. As soon as he walked in the door to the left, we just saw bodies laying everywhere, he said. One, a 70-year-old man, was still alive. Sippold and another medic carried the man outside, he said. Realizing there was no treatment they could provide to him on scene, they carried him to the ambulance. We put him on the stretcher, and Eric and I turned back around and we ran back into the building, he said. They found an injured woman, a 61-year-old who'd been shot in the arm. They carried her to safety as well. They went back in for the 3rd time. I just defaulted to my level of training and did what I knew how to do, Sippold said. What they're trained to do is more than just treat the injured. Our mission as medics is to save lives, he said. And if that means preventing death by whatever means necessary, whether it's we step in front of it or in between life and death, that's just what we do.
Someone have the 911 workers?
Bruce Carlton's phone at the Allegheny County Emergency Dispatch Center in Pittsburgh's Point Breeze neighborhood rang at 9:45 a.m. Saturday. A man identifying himself as Rabbi Jeffrey Myers of Squirrel Hills Tree of Life Synagogue was on the other end of the line. We have an active shooter in the building, Myers reported. Carlton, a call talker at the dispatch center, said Myers was out of breath and talking fast, that the rabbi managed to give a detailed account of the situation. Carlton made him repeat the details so we could enter the information into the county's dispatch system. I had to convince myself that I had delayed entirely too long getting the call in to dispatchers. I was thinking several minutes, said Carlton, 48, a former police officer. I'm actually surprised it was 20 seconds flat. Calls from people inside and outside the synagogue soon began flooding the 911 center in what several veteran dispatchers who spoke with reporters Tuesday described as the worst situation they've ever faced. Telecommunications officers, including call talkers and dispatchers and their shift managers, methodically took the information and radioed it to police and paramedics at the scene and en route. At the same time, they handled unrelated calls from other parts of the county. Across the room from Carlton that Sunday morning, dispatcher Michael Steinmiller, 30, heard somebody yell, "Active shooter." Steinmiller's computer said Channel 3 for Pittsburgh Police. It was his call. I sent a few units from the Zone 4 police station in Squirrel Hill, Steinmiller said. Minutes later, he heard what he described as his worst nightmare. Officer shot, officer down. Michelle Kalinsky, who was in her 5th week of training as a telecommunications officer, took a call from a man in the basement of the synagogue. He was hiding in a closet with a woman and a man who had been wounded. The caller said he couldn't feel the other man's pulse. Kalinsky, 51, said the man in the closet had seen the shooter, but the closet was dark and the gunman didn't see him hiding there. I was letting him know the shooter was still in the building and he was still shooting. We assured him that help was on the way, that SWAT would be there soon. He helped us Kolinsky said. I stayed on the phone with him until SWAT got there, she said. The call lasted 44 minutes. Carlton stayed on the line with Myers for 56 minutes as the rabbi hid in the bathroom. They spoke in whispers, with Carlton providing updates when state police and a helicopter were on the way and police made it onto the roof. Myers relayed what he was hearing. Occasionally, I'd ask him, "Are you still with me? Give me a sign." Carlton said, from where he was at, it was surprisingly quiet. I didn't really recall hearing any shots myself, but every time he said, another volley of 5 shots, another volley of 10 shots, I was putting that in the call so the police knew what was still coming. Carlton added, the initial dispatch of 20 to 30 shots coming from the lobby, those were his words, comments that I was dictating, and that went out over the air. Garrett Wagner, a shift commander working that day, credited the call takers and dispatchers for working together to handle the chaotic situation at Tree of Life and other calls from across the county. We don't just shut down because of one incident, Wagner said. After Steinmiller's shift ended, he went home and made soup. Carlton went to the scene in the Zone 4 police station to tell officers they did a terrific job. Kolinsky said she felt a sense of satisfaction. You go through training and you think, oh, am I going to be able to do this job? She said. When it came down to it, I was able to put aside those feelings and do what I needed to do. Now I know where I need to be.
At least 3 of the doctors and nurses who cared for Robert Bowers at the Allegheny General Hospital were Jewish, according to the president, Jeffrey K. Cohen. Cohen is personally connected to the shooting beyond his role at the hospital. He lives so close to the Tree of Life synagogue, he heard the gunshots as the massacre unfolded. He knew 9 of the people who were killed. In the emergency room when he arrived, Bowers was shouting, "I went to kill all the Jews." Still, that didn't stop Cohen from going to check in on Bowers to ask him whether he was in pain. The man said he was fine. I thought it was important to at least talk to him and meet him, Cohen told ABC. You can't, on one hand, say we should talk to each other and then I don't talk to him. So you lead by example, and I'm the leader of the hospital. He asked me who I was. I said, I'm Dr. Cohen, the president of the hospital, Cohen said, and I turned around and left. And the FBI agent that was guarding him said, I don't know that I could have done that. We're here to take care of sick people. We're not here to judge you. We're here to take care of people that need our help. Cohen's simple, unapologetic description of how Bowers came to be treated fairly and impartially by the very people he had supposedly hated has traveled quickly around the world. Perhaps it was a stark reminder that there is something more powerful than caring only for one's own. Perhaps it was Cohen's radical demonstration of humanity in an era increasingly marked by naked partisanship and tribalism. Cohen, citing patient privacy laws, declined to give specifics about Bowers' condition and treatment, but Cohen said that 2 of the practitioners who treated Bowers when he arrived at the hospital were Jewish, the attending emergency room doctor and nurse, whose father is a rabbi. I will tell you that I'm very proud of them, he said to his staff. They did a great job. They answered the bell. Cohen said he saw Bowers as the product of not the originator of larger problems, all of the chaos that's going on. The gentleman didn't appear to be a member of the Mensa Society, he told CNN. He listens to the noise, he hears the noise. The noise is telling him his people were being slaughtered. He thought it was time to rise up and do something. He's completely confused. Cohen saved his harsh words for the people he said were responsible for the toxic climate in the country. It's time for leaders to lead, he said, and the words mean things, and the words are leading people to do things like this, and I find it appalling.
Does someone have Ari Mahler dinner?
I am the Jewish nurse. Yes, that Jewish nurse. The same one that people are talking about in the Pittsburgh shooting that left 11 dead. The trauma nurse in the ER that cared for Robert Bowers, who yelled death to all Jews as he was wheeled into the hospital. The Jewish nurse who ran into a room to save his life. To be honest, I'm nervous about sharing this. I just know I feel alone right now, and the irony of the world talking about me doesn't seem fair without the chance to speak for myself. Here I am, the Jewish nurse that cared for Robert Bowers. As I've watched them talk about me on CNN, Fox News, Anderson Cooper, PBS, and the local news stations. I've read articles mentioning me in the New York Times and the Washington Post. The fact that I did my job, a job which requires compassion and empathy over everything, is newsworthy to people because I'm Jewish. Even more so because my dad's a rabbi. I'm sure he had no idea I was Jewish. Why thank a Jewish nurse when 15 minutes beforehand you'd shoot me in the head with no remorse? I didn't say a word to him about my religion. I chose not to say anything to him the entire time. I wanted him to feel compassion. I chose to show him empathy. I feel that the best way to honor his victims was for a Jew to prove him wrong. Love, that's why I did it. Love as an action is more powerful than words, and love in the face of evil gives others hope. It demonstrates humanity. It reaffirms why we're all here. The meaning of life is to give meaning to life, and love is the ultimate force that connects all living beings. I could care less what Robert Bowers thinks, but you, the person reading this, love is the only message I wish to instill in you. If my actions mean anything, love means everything.
Does someone have Bill to say or Bill to do that?
No one can prepare you to lead a city through its darkest hour, but you don't have to do it alone. Those first few days after the Tree of Life massacre, the advice of mayors who had led their own cities in times of great tragedy was invaluable. Harp, Orlando, San Bernardino. None of us has all the answers, but having lived through something similar, the ability to share our experiences and learn from one another meant everything. That is why we are bringing the experiences, lessons, and unanswered questions of Pittsburgh to the world. Last week, we gathered in Israel with municipal leaders from around the globe for the 33rd International Mayors Conference hosted by the American Jewish Congress and Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mayors are often on the front lines against today's tragedies, attacks, and battles with hate. The conference provides a platform from which to share the lessons of Pittsburgh with local governments near and far, in order to prevent future violence and draw some good from Pittsburgh's darkest day. If you had asked a random American 6 months ago to guess where the next anti-Semitic attack would take place, chances are he or she would not have said Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's Jewish community is integral to the city's history and identity. It wouldn't be Pittsburgh without it. Yet on October 27th, Pittsburgh became the site of the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in the history of the United States. That anti-Semitism is on the rise is not new. 2017 saw a 37% increase in anti-Semitic hate crime, the third increase in as many years. And this is taking place around the world. A recent poll revealed a third of Europeans believe Jews used the Holocaust to advance their own agendas. In France, anti-Semitism rose 74% in 2018 from 2017, a truly alarming statistic. But perhaps more than any other incident, this attack should represent an international wake-up call that anti-Semitism is a real threat to Jewish lives everywhere. Before Pittsburgh, anti-Semitism in the US felt little more than a pale imitation of the anti-Semitism of old.
So I was in Pittsburgh that weekend in order to go to a program at Dor Hadash, which we ended up not going to because my daughter and my nephew were playing so happily. And we got, the phone started, my sister's phone started vibrating. First it was, she was like, there's an active shooter in Pittsburgh. And then it was, it's in Squirrel Hill. And then it was, it's at Tree of Life. And then we started thinking, who is actually in the building right now? So we left my daughter and my nephew in the living room, very confused. And my mother and sister and I went into my mom's bedroom. We had the TV on CNN, and each of us had our phones open with Facebook. There was texting, there were messages. And we are looking on all of people's pages and on CNN, trying to see who is alive, trying to imagine who could be dead. It could have been any of 100 people. It could have been 100 people. We just had no information. We had calls from a cousin in Israel and France within the first 15 minutes. You know, it sort of zoomed around the world in some places faster than it came to us in Squirrel Hill. And people in the congregation started calling around. When something is considered a hate crime, I learned a lot of gory details. When something is a hate crime, the FBI investigates, and they have different protocols. So the shooter was using a machine gun, and it took till 5 o'clock that night for them to identify the bodies and to confirm who was dead. And so that whole time, congregants were calling the ERs, someone drove to the morgue. You don't want to call someone and say, are you alive? There's no etiquette, no protocol, no preparation that you could give in the whole world to be in this moment. I'm gonna I know Rabbi Lana knows Doris and Dean. Doris and Dean. Doris and Dean and Ruth and Cy Drescher are very active members. You know, I knew them my whole life. And Doris, remember I said Doris doesn't have a rabbi, but just like me, Doris became so involved and found being part of Doris so rewarding that she, like me, decided to go to rabbinical school. So she was in Alana's class. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about. I might end up having to skip someone who has a reading, but I'm not sure, and I'm going to just go as well. Doris and her husband drove up to the synagogue shortly after the shooting began, and they very nearly got caught out of the gunfire. There were shards of glass all over the sidewalk, and at the same moment we heard ba-boom, 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 she said. Her husband Dee yelled in active fire, run. And they ran to their car and called 911.
Wait a minute. Well, there might have been a problem with the microphone. The microphone is not working.
Testing.
Oh, it works. I have a very good idea. Please pause as we change out some. Oh, no, it's not. Some genius of a person. No, but it will be very good. Hold that. The other side's on one. The other side's over here. Hang on. 10 seconds.
Okay?
Right. Go for it.
So Rabbi Doris said, if we'd been there 3 minutes earlier, maybe 2 minutes earlier, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be talking to you. Members of the Tree of Life Synagogue, no, it's an error in the newspaper article, hold on. They were 3 minutes late. That's why they're alive today. Have you processed that? I'm not sure I processed it yet. No. Seymour, also late, was driving in when he saw them waving and yelling, "Don't go in." And then someone else came running out and said, there are guns going off. Ruth said, not having been there, my gratitude was very selfish. I was very grateful that my husband came home. You've drawn your curtains now at home. The curtains are drawn in the picture. Yes, why? Sudden phobia, she said, required in the moment, vulnerability. Then the reporter said, Dean, I noticed before the interview started, you were holding your wife's hand, and you were also holding Sai's hand. The way to respond to a moment of trauma is to reach out, to help each other, Ruth replied. Rabbi Doris says she doesn't know if she can ever return to that building. So the part that I edited out this time is that there was a lot of stuff about Trump because of the timing. He was president. It was the first, it was 2017. And this is a very liberal community. And especially Dor Hadash, the trigger, the inciting incident for the shooter was that Dor Hadash had signed on to Hayes's Refugee Shabbat, which I know is something we do here. It was something the Social Action Committee, just at a meeting casually, everyone agreed we should sign on, we support this cause, and everyone said yes. And that was sort of all of it. But then there was an advertisement with the names of all the congregations supporting or that were sponsoring a Refugee Shabbat. And he saw Dor Hadash's name and he looked it up. And he drove into Squirrel Hill and he did this obscene thing. I guess I don't want to give Trump more space, but there is a part of the story that I will tell you. He called Mayor Peduto while that shooting was going on, and he said, you have my full support. The shooting is still going on. And then he started complaining. Trump started complaining to Peduto about how poorly he was being treated during the active shooting. And, the mayor hung up on him. And Alana, can you look, there's a slide about the vigil. The FBI was there and they were not telling us who was dead, and we didn't know who was injured. And they wanted to sort of calm everything down and keep everyone, they wanted people to stay home. And it was actually the teenagers from my high school who said, no way. We have to be together. And one of the kids' mothers was a friend of mine, a Reformed cantor. And so the high school kids organized a citywide vigil. They sat a block away from Tree of Life in the Starbucks, and they planned it. And thousands of people came. And we gathered right in the center of Squirrel Hill, right outside the JCC. The JCC is where the families of the people we thought had been in the building were waiting for confirmation. And right across from the JCC is Mr. Rogers' church. I kid you not. I literally grew up in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And
going over the neighborhood, that's Squirrel Hill.
Yep, my mother has stories about chasing him and cutting him off in a crosswalk so that he would say hello to me in my car seat. And no. We go to this vigil with thousands of people. It's right outside my aunt's condo. She lives in that same corner. And, I'm seeing people from all parts of my life. And my daughter Zoe was with me, and I think she was 13. She might have been 14. They start singing, and they sang the Mishaberach. And she and I are singing, and she says to me, "Why aren't other people singing? Why are we the only people singing?" And I was able to say, because the other people aren't Jewish. The approach, the feeling was not that this is something that happened to the Jews, which is the demarcation point from Kristallnacht and other horrors. With Kristallnacht, the people who weren't targeted didn't get involved. It wasn't happening to them. They kept their heads down. In Pittsburgh, there were thousands of non-Jewish people outside that day. There's a picture, this picture on the left-hand side, I just love. There was this man standing on the steps of Mr. Rogers' church, an African-American man holding a sign that said, "Jewish Lives Matter." And it was the height of, just sort of the language of Black Lives Matter, becoming even more powerful. And then in that moment, that image just has stayed with me forever. And there were other things like that. The imams of Pittsburgh all organized so that that people should be able to feel safe when they prayed, and they offered to stand outside of the synagogues and form a human band around the synagogues so that the Jewish people would feel safe to pray. And there are a lot of miracles, and I can't exactly tell you why, but every year when I do this, it has gotten more optimistic. My feelings that come with it. I think maybe because people survived and people triumph. Jerry is buried about 2 graves over from my dad, and whenever I'm there, I feel like, they're keeping each other good company. And you can always see that people have come and put stones on his grave. And it's a very large, elaborate headstone. There's always clearly new people who've been there. So I didn't, so at the vigil, after we sang some more songs and there were some denunciations of horror and so forth, it ended with everyone chanting, "Vote, vote, 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 vote," because we were just before the midterm elections. So you can see the timing is like this. I'm going to actually just read. So I'm going to read Ron Linden's words, Alana. Yeah. So Ron is a professor at Pitt, and I babysat for his kids every day after 9th grade. His words capture the rage that we were feeling. So many people we know who know we live in Pittsburgh and that we have called Squirrel Hill home for 40 years, thought of us, wrote and called when they heard about the shooting. We have been moved and heartened by their concern. We told you, our friends in our family, that we are safe in the sense that we were fortunate not to be among the victims of Saturday's terrible hate crime. We are not really safe, of course, because this vile, murderous bigotry can and has hit all of our communities, especially those who are consistently othered, people of color, Muslims, LGBT people. The sentiments behind the worst anti-Semitic atrocity in American history have been legitimized and weaponized by cowardly, unprincipled political leaders who will now fall all over themselves to send their thoughts and prayers. Keep those facile words. You'll have to excuse me. Instead, show us some balls. Stand up to the purveyors of hate instead of cozying up to them. Stand up to the NRA instead of licking their boots for campaign contributions. Stand up for our communities, our diversity, for the founding dream of our society and our country. That dream is missing, not lost, but it will take courage to find it again. Today's victims, like others before them, deserve no less. So the other part of how the politicization kept interfering with the grief is that Trump decided he would come to Pittsburgh immediately as the great comforter. And 53,000 people signed. 53,000 people signed a petition in 24 hours saying, do not come. It was written by Ben the Ark. It was very powerful. Do not come unless you are ready to renounce anti-Semitism and hatred and white nationalism and all. And that was very powerful. That is a really large number, 24 hours. And he came anyhow. And the Tree of Life rabbi would see him. No one from Dor Hadash would see him. The mayor had asked him not to come. The FBI had asked him not to come. He tried to go see the police in the hospital. One policeman let him come, another didn't. And then when he rode through the streets, the people turned their backs to the car as a motorcade as it went by. It did feel very, it felt very empowering to show our contempt and to, there's now a book, an exhibit about how differently the three congregations responded. Dor Hadash started an independent 501c3 nonprofit to fight against gun violence. Threw themselves into social action and politics. And, the traditional conservative congregation didn't do that. Because I was sort of, if you think of it, this is impacting people in concentric circles, which is what I tried to convey with the different stories. So I was just far enough out that, my life went on the next day. By the time we went to bed, we knew that Dan was undergoing, he was 70 something years old and he'd been shot in the abdomen, and that Jerry was dead, and the other 10 people. And so I got up at about 6 or 7 in the morning because time wasn't real. And my mother was sitting in her kitchen, and she looked worse than she did the day my dad died. And the first thing she said is, I think it's not too late to hide Ryan. And Ryan was my 7-year-old nephew. And where she went in her head was a Holocaust where you could try and let my nephew pass. Could he pass as not Jewish? Could we protect him if he didn't identify as Jewish? And she's horrified that she's embarrassed that she said it and that I teach it. But being Jewish was core to my mother. It was that we weren't in a rational place, and your instinct is to do anything for people you love. And then the other thing she was really preoccupied with was that I had to leave. And I had to leave that morning. So by 8 o'clock, she had us out the door because she didn't want Zoe to be scarred by this. She didn't want my daughter to absorb the trauma that everyone was feeling. So I went home, and from here, I did all these strange things. Like there was no one, the FBI wanted the congregational website to be changed. They wanted the words Highest not to be there, Highest and Dor Hadash, because they wanted to not help anyone who might want to follow up. And then there were rules like Dan was eventually at home and his family needed food, but you couldn't just take food there. You had to get on a list ahead of time and have your name on it because the FBI was concerned that someone would bring poisoned food and leave it on the porch because they would be so determined to finish this job. And then I, there wasn't a rabbi, and the top level of leadership in the congregation was, decimated and traumatized. So, I talked to the adult ed, the social action chair, who felt guilty that she had suggested we co-sponsor the highest Shabbat. And I talked to raging congregants who wanted specifically to talk about this in relation to Kristallnacht. Can you turn to my, there's one slide about Kristallnacht. It's my poem. It's in, there it is. Yep. So this is what I wrote. I'm just going to read it to you, and then I'm going to end here. So I wrote this on November 9th, 2018. Is that right? I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to understand why the world hasn't stopped, why life as normal just goes on after the massacre, the desecration. And then it is today, November 9th, 2018, the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, November 9th, 1938. Another horrendous, monumental, violent, anti-Semitic attack when the world should have stopped, corrected course. But life went on the next day, business as usual for the people of Nazi Germany, except for those for whom it didn't, except for those for whom it was the beginning of the end. Especially today, after 80 years of teaching, of remembering our history, I ask, why hasn't the world stopped? And why do we let life as normal go on? So this is the picture that ran on the cover of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. So that's like the Philadelphia Inquirer. It's a secular paper. And most people couldn't read it, but the words, the editor who did it, who was Jewish, said at some point, English words and words we all understand aren't, can't speak to this. And so that this was this powerful, and again, it's that message. This isn't something that happened to the Jewish people of Squirrel Hill. This is something that happened to Pittsburgh, to an entire wide community. And to all people who care about being in community and loving each other. Okay, your show.
If it's all right with all of you, I'm going to go ahead and keep my mask on while I speak this morning. So first of all, I want to thank Rabbi Erin so much for this touching, powerful, moving, and personal program. I just want to add sort of as my own piece. So this massacre hit very close to home in our house as well, though not quite as close to home. Rebecca works for HIAS, and she is the National Director for Grassroots and Campaigns for HIAS, and Refugee Shabbat is her program nationally. And as that week unfolded and she was writing, with her team, all of these talking points that all of these people and all of these congregations who had sponsored Refugee Shabbat were going to be reading as everyone was contacted by the press. Right? And we at Or Hadash sponsor Refugee Shabbat as well. We are one of the 300 plus congregations around this country who participate in this program. And there's a lot of guilt that was being carried by, I think, all of us. And this question of did we bring this upon ourselves? Did we make ourselves vulnerable? And there's also this, especially as we look out at the makeup of this vigil, and as Rabbi Erin was saying about, this question, why isn't anyone singing Misha Berach with us? And because they're not Jewish. That answer is no. Because when people carry out hate crimes, that hate is not because of anything that we do. In fact, the fact that we do and that reaching out towards others triggers that hate in others, it means that we need to keep doing, that we are actually pushing towards the light, towards life, towards solidarity. May we never, ever, ever reach a time when hatred wins and stops us from building those coalitions and standing side by side on the steps of Mr. Rogers' church, right? So I was asked by Rabbi Erin and by Dan to say a couple of things about some of the things that have happened at Or Hadash since the Tree of Life Dor Hadash New Light synagogue was attacked. Of course, one of the biggest things that came out of this moment across the Jewish community was thinking carefully about and rethinking very carefully about how we think about security and safety in our building and preparedness in our building. I want to notice that Jules Mermelstein is sitting right there. He was our first, I think our founding chair of the Safety and Security Task Force, which was founded shortly after or refounded shortly after the Tree of Life, because I think that there was an early founding after those bomb threats at all the JCCs, and then really refounded in its current iteration shortly after the Tree of Life synagogue attack. But sort of throughout our building, we've gone through a very, very careful assessment about what it means to keep our community safe. All of our windows have shatter-resistant glass coatings, or plastic shatter-resistant coatings on all the glass windows, panic buttons throughout the building, as well as a cell phone app that is ready to start taking over if and when those buttons are obsolete, as well as trainings for how to call in. We know, just like they trained at Tree of Life, where those safe rooms are on the first and second floors of our building. For those that do not know, they are the boardroom and my office, because those are the doors that are able to lock from the inside with deadbolts on both sides. And both of those rooms have both phones that are hardwired into the wall and panic buttons. We now have fobbed entrances to our synagogue, right? No longer are our doors unlocked on Shabbat, but also we want everyone to feel welcome, right? So balancing having a doorbell and having all members have fobbed access to the building with the fact that the reality is we should have our building locked on Shabbat mornings. And an upgrade to all of our doors, which has been unfolding throughout the summer, this summer. We also have added first aid trauma and aid stations to our building, and have an accompanying app. And actually all of our madrichim and teachers were trained on that app last year. We're probably going to have another retraining again for how to walk through first aid steps until paramedics arrive, or just in the case of an accident in the building, right? Someone falls down the stairs. What do you do for someone who has hurt themselves in this building, right? It doesn't have to be some sort of a cataclysmic attack to need to keep ourselves safe. And then for that exact reason, we also have added defibrillators to our building, right? In case someone, God forbid, has a cardiac event, how do we save a life? Because we know as Jews that this value of pikuach nefesh, of saving a life, is the most important value. It supersedes all others. If we save one life, we save the entire world. And so for me, one of the most important lessons to come out of all of this is the overflowing of life and love. Rabbi Erin pointed out so beautifully one key difference between Kristallnacht and this contemporary pogrom. And that's the stark difference in inter-religious, inter-ethnic, interracial solidarity that came out, right? History repeats itself, but sometimes if we look closely enough, we notice that even as history rhymes with itself, thank you, Jules, the history teacher right there, that rhyming, that, you know, when two things rhyme with themselves, right, that they're not exactly the same, that we are learning as a human race, and may we continue to push that learning in that correct direction, standing in solidarity with one another, not only when we ourselves find ourselves on that victim side, but perhaps especially when we don't, that we remember what that picture looks like, and that we see ourselves in that picture every single time, whether that headline is in Hebrew, whether that headline is in English, whether that headline is in Arabic, whether that headline is in Sanskrit, whether that headline is in whatever Cyrillic, whatever alphabet that is written in. I believe that we are going to be ending today. I want to call up Vivian Kane, yes, to speak about the Or Hadash Gun Violence Prevention and Suicide Prevention Task Force and our Holocaust Education Committee. And as she's coming up, a huge thanks to the Holocaust Education Committee for organizing this event today alongside our Smile School.
I'm here to say a few words about our Holocaust Education Committee and our Gun Violence and Suicide Prevention Task Force, both of which are chaired by Dan Schwarz, who is out of town but here on Zoom. Hey, Dan. The Holocaust Education Committee is an outgrowth of the Holocaust Memorial Committee that worked for 2 years to commission a sculpture to commemorate the Holocaust. That sculpture stands just outside. Since then, we've taken on planning of Kristallnacht and Yom HaShoah commemoration events with Rabbi Alana and the Smile School. This year, Rabbi Erin provided us this remarkable program. In the past, we have coordinated with HAMEC, the Holocaust Awareness Museum and Education Center in Elkins Park, to enlist a Holocaust survivor to come speak to our students and congregants in person or on Zoom. We have also had Holocaust survivors speak who are family members of Or Hadash congregants. Our committee also met with a Holocaust education specialist prior to purchasing books for the Smile School, geared for each age group's understanding, ranging from bullying to anti-Semitism. We have also been working on a Holocaust library on the second floor for several years, interrupted by the pandemic. This will be a resource for Smile School teachers, students, and Or Hadash congregants. We hope to officially open the library this spring in time for Yom HaShoah. We welcome anyone interested in Holocaust education to join our committee. The Or Hadash Gun Violence and Suicide Prevention Task Force has been in existence for 8 or 9 years now. We've been working for safer gun laws and suicide prevention. We have organized town hall events with elected officials, participated in rallies to end gun violence locally and in Harrisburg. We work with Ceasefire PA, Moms Demand Action, Soul Shot, and other organizations. We have had QPR, that's Question, Persuade, Refer, suicide prevention workshops at Or Hadash, separately for teens and for adults at regular intervals. Recently, a team from Or Hadash participated in the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention's Out of the Darkness March in Center City. Our congregant Wendy Elliott Vandeveer, an artist, has recently painted a portrait of a victim of gun violence, which is part of this year's Philadelphia Souls Shot exhibition. Our Gun Violence and Suicide Prevention Task Force is now part of a coalition of Philadelphia area synagogues working together to end gun violence. You can see how many ways we can work on gun violence. Our task force is open to teen students as well as adults, and we welcome new members. Thank you.
So we're going to close this morning with, wait, do you want me to? Yeah, you got to. We're going to close this morning the way we began, with Cheryl and giving us some beautiful, beautiful music on her harp, as together we join in a prayer for all of these things in our lives to continue. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart. Cheryl. Shavua Tov.